Just when it looks complicated enough, the South Korean plot thickens. The head of the state-run pensions fund detained over possible links to the presidential corruption scandal. She's facing impeachment, her ruling party is split. So what are the political implications? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Now, South Korea has had a very difficult year. Months of the biggest protests ever seen there. Then Parliament voting to impeach the president. The corruption scandal surrounding her now ensnares the head of the state-run pension fund, who's also a former health minister. He's detained for questioning by fraud investigators, trying to determine whether massive bribes were paid. From Seoul, Craig Leeson has more.
Well, the National Pension Scheme is the third biggest fund of its kind in the world, and the chairman, Moon Hyung-pyo, had his home raided on Monday as the special prosecutors looked for evidence of his involvement in this corruption scandal. They then called him in for questioning yesterday and decided to detain him, fearing that maybe he would go and destroy evidence. What they're looking for is a link between the NPS and a donation made by Samsung worth tens of millions of dollars to two foundations controlled by Soon-sil, the woman at the centre of this controversy. It's alleged that Samsung made that donation in return for the NPS to vote for two Samsung affiliates to merge. Now, the NPS was a shareholder of one of those affiliates. Now, that merger is said to have benefited the founding family of Samsung and given it control of the group at the expense of other shareholders, including the NPS. So as special prosecutors continue their investigation into this, it's clear they're trying to find a link between any potential bribery of these big businesses, such as Samsung, and a government decision to make the NPS agree to that merger, which ultimately benefited Samsung. Now, what we're likely to see as this week continues is the special prosecutors form a raid and look into the offices of the president as they search for further evidence that may or may not prove her collusion with Che in this corruption scandal.
Well, the expanding probe into South Korea's corruption scandal is having dramatic political implications, particularly for the Saenuri party of President Park. 29 party members defected on Tuesday. They plan to form a new conservative party to campaign for reform. The defections demote Saenuri to the second largest party in parliament, holding fewer than a third of seats now. The new party members hope to be joined by Ban Ki-moon, who's expected to launch a bid for president when he retires as the UN Secretary General. The elections are scheduled for next December, but may come earlier if the Constitutional Court upholds the impeachment of the president. Let's bring our guest into the show now. We have joining us from Seoul, B.J. Kim. He's an adjunct professor at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. In Exeter, Aidan Foster Carter, Honorary Senior Research Fellow in Sociology and Modern Korea at Leeds University. And in Gapyeong, Jean Lee, Global Fellow at the Korea Center at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you all. Could start with B.J. Kim. Is the Conservative camp, not just the ruling party, the Conservative camp as a whole now, fractured, more damaged than ever before because of the move of some of these lawmakers who say we're going to have our own party?
Indeed, and it's badly fractured at this point, and those people who have not been on the side with President Park, they're trying to kind of salvage their political future here, and they're presenting this new formation of a new political group here, and it actually offers a choice for the voters for the upcoming presidential election, because now they can have, perhaps in their own view, a viable political party that they can go to in a way. And because the conservative camp has been in such a disarray, this time for conservative voters, this is a little bit of a sense of relief in a way that we're observing here in Korea.
All right, Aidan, does this leave the future chances of conservatives to rule the country compared to liberals and others perhaps a little diminished?
Certainly a little diminished. The thing you have to remember is that South Korea, like my own country, the UK, has a first-past-the-post electoral system, unlike a number of continental European and other countries where you get a transferable vote. So you vote for Conservative A and you've got a list and you put for Conservative B. There's none of that. So basically, who unites wins and who splits loses. And we've seen twice in elections in Korea in the past, without going into detail, that where the one case, the left of centre, the liberal camp, ran two candidates, and what happens? The right got in, and then it happened the other way around. The Conservatives split and the left got in. What is unprecedented this time, or at least at this moment, there may yet be further permutations and combinations and alliances, who knows, is both the left and the right were split. The Liberals were split already into two parties, and now the right is split into two. So really, it's kind of anybody's guess when it's like this, and the personal following of whoever the candidate may be, which no doubt we're going to get to, also comes into it. So it introduces a further random element and uncertainty, what was already a pretty worrying situation where you have months of limbo, followed by, you know, big question mark as to who the next leader will be.
Okay, uncertainty there. Jane, what do you make of the scenario, though, of Ban Ki-moon joining this new Conservative Party for Reform? Does that perhaps reduce some of the uncertainty? Does it give the Conservatives a huge boost?
Well, we will certainly be seeing how these two conservative parties will be vying for his support. They will certainly want to have him as their presidential candidate. It's not clear which direction he's going to go. All he said is that he is going to return to Korea after his term ends in a couple of days. So he should be back in Korea in a couple of weeks. So we'll see how that plays out. But I agree that this does risk splitting the conservative vote, and there is an opportunity here for the Liberals to get their candidate in, and that could certainly shake things up when it comes to politics and policy in South Korea.
All right. Well, is there much of a chance, do you think, Jane, of the Constitutional Court not upholding the impeachment verdict? And what would that mean for Conservatives in the country?
There is a precedent, you know, there was an impeachment vote in 2004. The late president, Roh Moo-hyun, was also impeached by Parliament. It took nearly 2 months for the court to nullify that vote and to re-establish him in power as president. So there has been a precedent where the Constitutional Court has struck down that impeachment vote. So we will see. And this is a far more complicated impeachment bill this time around than in 2004.
It's complicated. It's a little unpredictable. Let me come back to Aidan. Will this impeachment saga delay the country from making hard decisions on the economy, on economic reforms, on industries that really need some structural reform?
Absolutely, and not only in that sphere. I mean, the trouble with having this prolonged period, I mean, no doubt it's right and fair that nothing be done in haste, and the Constitutional Court have indicated they're not going to be quick about it. But meanwhile, you have a caretaker in charge. With all respect to Mr. Hwang Kyo-ahn, the post of Prime Minister in South Korea is normally very much someone who is told what to do. It's a presidential appointment, very centralized system. So he has no mandate and possibly no legal authority to do anything very drastic. So that means, yes, you mentioned the economy, it's ticking along. It'll just be more pump priming, a bit more stimulus, but hard tasks of tackling the mighty chaebol conglomerates or labour market reform, anathema to the right and left respectively. No one's going to do any of that. And what about, you know, you've got Trump coming in and no one knows what on earth he's going to do and which of the various contradictory things he said he's going to actually put into practice. And you have North Korea gleefully rubbing its hands, but so far thankfully not doing anything. You need strong proactive leadership, and that's what South Korea is going to be lacking for several months, which is not good.
All right, I want to pick up on some of those foreign policy issues in a moment, but before I do that, if we can continue with BJ on the point of the economy, do you agree with that analysis? Is this whole saga holding the country up economically?
Well, you know, yeah, I guess my answer to that question will be that Korea is not going to face a major crisis or difficulties in terms of getting its economy going, because the problem with President Park Geun-hye in the minds of Korean people was her lack of vision and sense of direction in terms of, you know, her lack of initiative, introducing bold policy ideas and so on. So the way I see it, and the way in the eyes of many observers here, the economy will just continue on the way it has been even before her impeachment process began. So I don't see any major problem coming in our way. But as mentioned by other commentators here, if government has to make hard decisions for any kind of unexpected situation coming up or whatever, of course, making bold moves will be, of course,
But hang on, BJ, you say you don't see any problems coming your way. I mean, the population is shrinking, foreign industry is becoming ever more competitive. Capital investment forecasts tell us it's expected to be only something like 0.1% higher next year. There are some problems.
Well, those are problems, but those problems have been there, the whole time, basically, and it's a lingering issue. But what I'm talking about is if there's a kind of like sudden development where quick decision is made, that's where we are seeing difficulties and problems. But in terms of these long-term structural issues, the Korea has to deal with it, and we Korean people had been expecting the President Park Geun-hye herself to introduce bold vision and bold action to fix it and address it, and that's not what we have not seen in the past. So you see what I mean. The economy will continue on, and if sudden situation arises, we will face difficulties, but otherwise it will just go forward.
All right, Gene, aside of macroeconomics, what about the business community? An executive with the business giant Lotte Group was quoted this week as saying, quote, "Business at the chaebol will need to change significantly over the next few years." Do you think this impeachment saga is going to change the relationship between big business and politics?
Well, certainly the way South Korea has done business for decades, corruption is so much a part of business culture. It's so deeply a part of business culture, and that is really under scrutiny right now. And how these big businesses extract themselves from a culture of corruption that goes back decades is going to be very difficult and very interesting to watch. So they're really at a crossroads to try to root that out and try to turn a page in terms of how they do business. So that will certainly be interesting to see. But in the meantime, we are seeing every day in the news this or that chaebol head or business head being dragged in for questioning, and seeing that these corruption allegations are reaching so many different parts of the business community in South Korea.
We are seeing a lot of statements in the news. Let me quote one. The vice chairman of Samsung Electronics, Lee Jae-young, speaking this week about withdrawing Samsung from the Federation of Korean Industries lobbying group. Aidan, when you hear stuff like that, do you think that change has already started, or is this simply rhetoric?
Am I allowed to say neither on that particular thing? Lee Jae-young, of course, is not just the vice chairman. He's the son and heir of the comatose but still nominal chairman, great genius in his day, Lee Guen-hye. And one of the many paradoxes and anomalies of South Korea is you can have a world-leading company like Samsung, a giant in its field, did have certain problems with phones catching fire recently, but it's got a succession process that is straight out of Pyongyang, father to son, father to son. The FKI thing is, in a way, a detail. The Federation of Korean Industries is a lobby group for the chaebol. It is thought to have become too much involved in the Choe scandal, although the details are still unfolding. So everybody is basically withdrawing from it. The LG group has done the same. No doubt from the ashes, a new phoenix will arise, because the chaebol, they remain very powerful. And I'm a little skeptical about the possibility of reform, because South Korea still depends hugely on exports, the home market, for various reasons, including massive household debt. Not as powerful a driver as at 50 million people, quite well off, as it ought to be. So really, basically, to whatever president comes in, even if the left gets in, or the mild left, the chaebol say we are exports, which is largely true, although not wholly true, and despite a certain amount of rhetoric, they get left alone. So I fear that will continue to be the case.
If they continue to get left alone, BJ, does that mean there's really little that will change in terms of transparency, in terms of restricting business lobbying?
No, we have seen continuous progress in terms of having greater transparency and openness in the way the chaebol and government has been interacting with one another for the past several decades, and progress continues. And as a result of this current scandal, we will further move up in terms of raising the bars and raising expectations and standards for the interaction between business and government. And another commentator earlier called it's all corruption, but I don't think it's a fair way of describing it. Different countries have different ways of business community and then political community interacting with one another. Of course, Korean media, being critical about the current government, would like to present it as a corruptive behaviors, but these old practices are changing. They should not be necessarily absolutely called corruptions, but we are changing more towards a global way of having greater openness and transparency, and that's what's happening. So what we will see, continue to see down the road,
how is it changing already,
improvement
BJ?
of increase of the openness and transparency. Say that again.
Yeah, how is it already changing, as you say?
Every day, every other government comes in every other 5 years. We have so-called these scandals, and then all the ways that used to be a norm and well accepted is no longer acceptable after each scandal. And so it's changing at least every 5 years. Every time we hear this scandal, and this time. Clearly, one example is in the future when the government or a political leader would like to set up some kind of foundation for public cause, for instance, it will become much more difficult for business community to make their donations. The way they will make their donations will have to change, and it will become much more official, much more structured, and much more transparent and open.
Let's come back to Aidan, because you mentioned foreign policy, and I want to pick up some of those points now. We've got a new U.S. administration coming into the White House. At the same time, we've got this impeachment turmoil going on in Seoul. Does that mean that basically any policy is going to be perhaps determined more from Washington than from Seoul at this point in time? I mean, policy towards the Korean Peninsula.
I wouldn't draw that conclusion on a number of counts. So one, because Trump is so utterly unreadable. I mean, the man says 7 contradictory things before breakfast about almost everything, or late at night when he's tweeting.
Well, that doesn't seem to bother him, does it,
Aidan? Anyway,
if you don't have somebody with sufficient
it doesn't.
or equivalent chutzpah in Seoul, where does that leave South Korea's ability to project its policy interests?
But you might, you see. I'm not one of those who exist all over the place on the American right, and curiously also on the Korean left, who think that Washington calls all the shots. It doesn't. Koreans can be quite good at standing up for themselves, in my view. We've seen that there's at least one of the possible candidates for South Korean president who is happy to be described as the Korean Trump, though I don't think he's going to make it. No, you'll get a much more assertive South Korea. If you have an America that can't make up its mind and a president who talks from both sides of his mouth, maybe he'll talk to North Korea, but then he appoints very hawkish advisors. He says the trade deal that they've got between the US and South Korea is a bad deal, and so he says the US forces that South Korea should pay more for them, and so on. You'll certainly get whoever is in charge, even if it's Ban Ki-moon, who is probably better known for trying to make peace in the world with mixed results, but certainly if it's someone like Moon Jae-in, the main left-leaning candidate, then he'll stand up and he'll tell America where to go. Might be no bad thing.
All right, but that scenario, Gene, might take a while to get there, given the uncertainty Eugene talked about which way the Constitutional Court is going to go. I mean, we may assume that it's going to uphold the impeachment, but I think it's 2/3 of the 9 justices have to agree on removing the president from office, and the terms of 2 jurists are going to expire in March, which means it might be a little more uncertain than we think. And what happens if this turns into an extended, or not extended, but a Park presidency until the scheduled December 2017 elections? How is that going to play out when it comes to tough decisions on foreign policy?
Yeah, we're in the middle of political paralysis. The Constitutional Court has made it very clear that they're going to take their time. So we can be sure that it will be a couple months of kind of a power vacuum. And the concern, of course, in this region in Northeast Asia is that North Korea takes advantage of any kind of a power vacuum. Now, as Aidan mentioned, they are sitting back and enjoying the show in Seoul, to be honest. They are publishing pictures of the protests that have been going on for the past couple months. So they're enjoying this for the time being. But we have to keep in mind that they will be raising their hand and reminding Donald Trump that they are there and that they can cause trouble fairly early into his presidency. So I don't think that we can rely on the fact that they will sit quiet for that much longer.
BJ, what about policy towards North Korea? I mean, does the whole impeachment process open up the possibility of a change in direction towards North Korea, towards China?
No, not until the new president comes in. We don't know when the next presidential election is going to take place. It's without impeachment, it's supposed to take place at the end of next year. but looks like we have all these variables here. But until Korean people elect the new president, the interim government here, or even President Park Geun-hye, if she ever comes back to her office after the Constitutional Court strikes down the impeachment process, I don't think we will be any big change here. It will be just an inaction and perhaps status quo of the policy that had been in place for the past 4 years.
We've also, if I can come back to Jean, we've heard some rumblings from the opposition, at least when it comes to relations with Japan, at least concerning the deal to compensate Korean sexual slavery victims. When you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, does it look like there's a very strong possibility of change in the so-called trilateral relationship? If not with the US, then perhaps with Japan?
Certainly. I mean, we are in a period of transition in the region with Japan, the United States, and South Korea. So I think we will start to see some shifts in policy as the pieces fall into place. So it'll be very interesting in the next couple of months. As Aiden mentioned, we really don't know what Trump's policy is in the region. Perhaps he doesn't know what his policy is in the region. So I have been hesitant to really make any comment on how it will affect regional politics, but certainly we'll start to see some shifts in those relationships going forward.
All right, let's get a final thought from Seoul before we go. I think we've got a minute. So BJ Kim, as you look into your crystal ball, how do you see South Korea's future at this point, both in terms of its domestic challenges as well as the foreign policy issues we've been mentioning?
In short term, we have so many kind of uncertainties here without even knowing our political schedule. But in the long run, as a result of all this political scandal, people have realized that they are in charge, and the people empowerment here in Korea has only strengthened our democracy here for sure. And as I mentioned before, the overall standards in terms of how interaction should be conducted between business community on one hand and government the other, it's improving. So altogether, I think in the long run, it's all largely have been positive progress that we've been seeing being made.
All right, I think we've still got a little bit of time, so let me go to Exeter and pick up on a point which BJ mentioned there. Aiden, do you think people power has set some kind of new precedent that's going to impact the way the country runs itself?
To a degree. I can't sadly share BJ's optimism. I thought there was the tones of Dr. Pangloss there. Things do get a bit better. And I was very struck by the demonstrations on the street. They were very large, and unlike some Korean demonstrations in the past, they weren't violent. I think the South Korean people are very mature and sophisticated. I think they will tolerate less and less from their politicians, and I fondly hope, yes, that the outcome in the end of this crisis that we could all have done without, frankly, will be a better, stronger, more robust South Korean democracy.
All right, and I think we still have a minute left, so let me give that final thought then to Jean. As you look into the future of the country, do you think people power will be playing a bigger role, that the country has gone down some irreversible path right now?
I think that South Korea is a young democracy, and these are part of the growing pains, but these are positive. These are South Koreans exercising their right to protest and to speak out, and so it's part of the process of learning what democracy is all about. I do think the protests have been very entertaining, almost like shows rather than demonstrations. So, and I believe that there's going to be at least one or two or perhaps three more of these protests taking place. But it is a powerful show of unity among the people, whether it is entertainment or whether it is demonstration.
All right, I'm sure that show will go on, but this one must end now. Let's thank our guests very much, BJ Kim, Aiden Foster, Carter and Jean Lee. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.